Slavery in Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Andrea Ramirez. I'm going to talk about a little bit of slavery in Latin American for my class Introduction to Latin American and Caribbean Studies of the semester summer 2022, Professor Harry Frankie Rivera. Slavery in Latin America. Slavery was an economic and social institution that prevailed in Latin America from before the colonial era until it was formally abolished in the 19th century in the newly independent governments. Charles Chastain said, Latin America was born in blood and fire and conquest and slavery. Latin America was the main destination of millions of African people transported from America to Spanish colonies. Enslaved people, like I'm showing in the picture, which is the caste system, the slave people was a base of the Spanish caste system. As you can see, the peninsulares were, which was people from Spain, white people, were at the top, and enslaved or people from Africa or people from color were at the bottom. Okay, following with the mestizos and Native American Indians. During the slave trade, Latin America was the main destination of African people. Enslaved people was the base of the Spanish caste system, a Spanish colony. In addition to being enslaved and the encomienda system, native people were also forced to convert to Catholicism. Also, Empire relied on African Native Americans as primary labor force. The labor force was known as the encomienda system, and this system developed as a way of enslaving Native Americans to work in sugar plantations in the Caribbean or to extract precious metals such as gold and silver mines. The encomienda system in the encomienda system, a lot of people died due to the grueling work and also harsh treatment and exposure to disease, since they were they were traveling from another countries. The colonization of the Americans, the Spanish relied on the encomienda system and helped to end the Atlantic slave trade to organize, regulate, and control the labor of indigenous and African people as the demand increased for sugar and other crops grown in the Americas. The main conflict in Latin America history was sparked by conquest and colonization respectively. Conquest and colonization serve as the unifying starting point of a common narrative. Racial diversity has played a major role in Latin American history. The majority of the million of slaves transported from Africa between 1500 and the 1850s ended up in Latin America. People from Spain relied on African people as a new source of labor. An impact on slavery was the development of new ethnicities such as mulatto, which was the result of sexual relationship between Spanish and native women, which led to a mixed race and also a broad system called the casta system, which I showed before. The casta system incorporated and carefully defined the status of the diverse population of Europeans, Africans, and Native American in their empire. In the generation follow independence and numerous caste system inspired mixed race designations were eliminated from local record keeping and census forms. All people, aside from slaves, were expected to be citizens in republics on an equal footing with other citizens, except for non republican Brazil, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. Slavery declined everywhere, but the liberals' best effort before 1850 were undermined by a fundamental inconsistency between political theory and social reality. In this picture, we can see the I'm sorry. In this picture from a French visitor to Brazil, and it shows enslaved women are cooking for the field workers. Despite gaining their independence, Latin American nations continue to be examples of social inequality, where racial and class hierarchies shape how people live. One of the most extreme examples is the continued existence of slavery. All people aside from slaves were expected to be citizens in republics on an equal footing with other citizens. Except for non-republican Brazil, Cuba, and Puerto Rico, slavery declined everywhere. This picture is from Rio de Janeiro main slave market in 1830s. Also, Cuba got a lot more slaves than the other country. All Spanish America absorbed around 1.5 million slaves, and Brazil by itself at least 3.5 million. From the Caribbean down both coasts of South America, African slaves performed a thousand of tasks, but most especially they cultivated sugarcane. Today, their descendants form a large part of the population, about half overall, and the two greatest historical centers of sugar production, Brazil and the Caribbean region. From Cuba through Venezuela, Colombia, and Peru, there were plantations with slaves of African heritage. Not to mention Brazil, the country with the highest concentration in slaves. It was Brazil, not Cuba. The country with, which was the country with the highest concentration of slaves. Furthermore, slavery in Latin America was highly urban occurrence. Slaves performed domestic labor and work as artisans in every colonial city established by the Spanish Portuguese, even in areas like Argentina that lacked plantation agriculture. Black slaves constituted approximately a quarter of Buenos Aires' population in the early 1800s. In this picture shows abolition. Slave labor and plantation in the 19th century was often channeled towards export-based international markets. Common export from Brazil and the Caribbean included sugar, coffee, indigo, rice, and tobacco. The labor was intensive, difficult, and coercive. Slaves produced large quantities of sugar and coffee, especially in Brazilian and Caribbean plantations, whose exports were destined for international markets in Europe and the rest of the Americas. Between the independence wars of the 1810s and 1820s and the 1880s, when slavery was fully abolished in Cuba in 1886 and Brazil, slavery was abolished throughout Latin America in 1888. Thus, throughout the 19th century, abolition took place concurrently with the struggle for independent governments in Latin America. As national states have emerged and consolidated, historians have begun to pay more attention to this convergence, shifting their attention away from economic and legal explanation and towards disputes involving not just slavery but also political and civil rights.